There you are. All better.
There are a lot of Capcom franchises that I buy almost immediately. The iconic survival horror franchise Resident Evil, the action hack-and-slash franchise of Devil May Cry, the top-tier amazing fighting game franchise of Street Fighter, and some that have recently caught my attention with the iconic Mega Man and Monster Hunter franchise, along with Onimusha. And also this game, Pragmata. This game felt and was different. Not only was it an original IP, which Capcom hasn't done in a while, but also, I always knew this game existed when it was originally announced. But somehow, it just slipped through the cracks, and I never was able to play it like I wanted to until I borrowed it from my local library. And I finally sat down and got my chance to play it, and with the physical media potentially becoming less common over the next couple of years. Thanks a lot, PlayStation. But regardless of that, the overall entire experience of the game of Pragmata is overall great, but also deeply flawed. A lot of the flaws come from some elements of the story, but also the gameplay, with some elements being a little bit repetitive. While some elements of the story aren't exactly new and you have seen these type of things before and it's kind of a bit cliche, with some people calling out the similarities to The Last of Us when it comes to the dynamic between Hugh and Diana, and also some of the elements sharing a lot of similarities to other games that we have seen in the past decade, with some of the designs like Hugh's main outfit sharing a lot of similarities to Dead Space, along with some of the mechanics as well. And I do understand why, and I do believe that's a big reason why a lot of people weren't completely on board with this game, because it felt like a collage of everything that we've seen from gaming so far. Do you want hacking mechanics that are very similar to Watch Dogs with a hint of Horizon and a puzzle system that's similar to Marvel Spider-Man 1? That's here! Do you want a movement system that's very similar to Doom or even Dead Space or Resident Evil with shooting mechanics to match? That's here as well! Do you want a very interesting sci-fi story that pulls a lot from The Last of Us? That's here as well! That was literally the headspace for a lot of players going into Pragmata, and I do understand why, because after playing it, I do see a lot of the comparisons, a lot of the similarities, and not only is that not a bad thing completely, but it is very interesting because this game is not a rip-off of those games. While it does have aspects that are very similar to those games, it is its own original creation and it has its own style, to where it does stand out in a lot of ways, where you can point out a lot of similarities, but you can also actually see a lot of differences as well when it comes to the idea of the characters and the overall world having its own unique aesthetic compared to what we've seen previously, with the idea of the 3D printed element adding a whole new dynamic and feel to the world compared to other games. And while a lot of players have compared it to games like Dead Space or The Last of Us, this world that Capcom made for Pragmata is nothing like those games. While I can see some similarities when it comes to different elements of the story and also designs, that's really about it. Because where it does wear those influences on its shoulders, it still feels like its own thing. And it obviously feels like Capcom, especially when it comes down to some elements of the game design, where the shooting feels very similar to the classic Resident Evil 4 or the Resident Evil remakes with a little bit of Dead Space influence. And the overall map and exploration of this game gave me a lot of Devil May Cry and Resident Evil vibes, with the idea of backtracking, going to key areas, and a couple other things, with the lunar base being broken up into key sections, with your characters returning to one key spot, the shelter, which is your main HUD and main area that you'll be going into and spending the most time in. And this area can slightly change as you go along the story, with it changing as you find different other collectibles and spend more time with Diana. And some of the collectibles are Earth-based, which are holographic REMs, which will go into key sections with you finding 5, 3, or even 4 to fill out a key area, with there being 4 distinct ones that you can fill out. Very similar to Hogwarts Legacy, with the Room of Requirement having key sections for your beasts. But this is very similar to that, but instead of unlocking these rooms through the story, you actually unlock them through collectibles, where you actually have to hunt these things down. And every one of them is in a unique key zone of the base, along with other collectibles as well. And honestly, it was a very interesting experience hunting these things down. The only disappointing factor was when you do actually get all 4 sections filled out, there is no trophy. You only get a trophy if you do the first one, which in my own personal opinion, I felt was slightly disappointing and it kind of undercut things, but that is a very small nitpick. But regardless, I do feel that the collectibles of this game are great in some areas and can be hit or miss, with some of them actually pulling a lot from Resident Evil, with the cabin statues that you have to shoot and find, the REMs obviously, and also the upgraded points along with the mods. And there are some sections that you have to backtrack to because you have to get key upgrades to get rid of certain things. I personally wish there was more of that, but that is neither here nor there. Personally, when it comes to the mods, I do feel that some of them are great to use and it does kind of get you to experiment, but there are a lot of them, so it can get a bit overwhelming at times and suffer through some of the key problems that God of War had with its armor system. While I have talked about the collectibles, I do want to talk more about the exploration and map design, because I do appreciate the idea of Capcom actually working in that Resident Evil and Devil May Cry style of map design into this game. With it being semi-linear instead of open world, it actually gives a lot more flavor to the overall map design. While it does come off a bit samey with the overall space and overall lab motif that we have seen a billion freaking times, but when it comes down to this game, it actually kind of breaks the mold a little bit, with every key area having a unique feel to it that does make it very distinct and different, where it stands out and it doesn't just go with the overall lab motif every single time. It obviously does have a unique feel, with one of them being modeled off of New York, so to speak, to some extent. Another being modeled off of a greenhouse, and there is that overall feel of nature to it, and another one that is more outside and other stuff. So every key area has a unique element to it. While it still mixes in that space lab motif, it still feels and looks different each time you go in to a new area, where it doesn't suffer through this bland and boring problem that some of the other Capcom games have done, like Devil May Cry and sometimes Resident Evil, where most key sections feel the exact same with no differences between any of them, where it can be a bit bland on a look front. Not always, but some of the time. This game kind of tries to strike that balance between the struggles of how they've done map design in the past, and I do think it succeeds in a lot of areas. While it does sometimes feel a little bit samey, that only comes from the overexposure to lab designs and other stuff that we have seen before. When it comes to other aspects of gameplay, like the shooting and hacking, the shooting does feel a lot like a mixture of Dead Space and Resident Evil 4, but with some differences that do force the player's hand into some improvisation and also some gameplay experimentation when it comes down to the shooting, where it does have that Dead Space and Resident Evil 4 feel, with the idea of the over-the-shoulder camera, but with some slight differences as well that pull a little bit from Doom when it comes to its gun experimentation, without the momentum and the first-person style. Similar to the gun system of the Resident Evil remakes, you can switch between 4 or upgrade up to 10 guns, more than likely, that you can swap between, but I'm not completely for sure on that one, so don't take me on my word on that, because I didn't actually get a chance to upgrade that far. Each one of the guns you can find has a different type of use, and some of them are locked into key parts of your gun system, with red, green, and blue. And also your main weapon, which you can get more upgraded later on to be semi-automatic, with its standard pistol being a little bit okay, but it's still very clunky at times, and it's the only one that stays in your inventory despite you dying or other stuff. And I actually thought that was very unique, because it actually forces you to use your primary weapon, with the secondary weapons being more for experimentation, customizing different loadouts and different combinations, where you can upgrade and equip certain key guns, but once they do run out, you have to find a different one. Which, in combat, some enemies can drop certain guns, which forces the player, if you run out of certain weapons, into some improvisation, forcing you to try different loadouts to actually survive, which is a brilliant and unique aspect of the gunplay of this game, which is very similar to some aspects of Resident Evil, where you're forced to switch between different guns, and also Devil May Cry, forcing you to switch between your weapons as Dante to provide a bit of experimentation to your loadout and taking out certain enemies, which both of them have a key strategy to defeat certain enemies, with certain aspects of gameplay providing those strategies. While I do love aspects of the gunplay, I do think that the lack of different finishers and also the over-reliance on the hacking system that can get repetitive after a while can get and actually deter a lot of people. While the hacking system is great and brilliantly implemented into the overall lock-on and the gunplay, sometimes it does kind of screw up your lock-on from time to time, and you could be locking on to one key enemy and it locks onto something else in its entirety, which does kind of screw you off your game, which is a problem in the game design of the hacking, because the hacking can get a bit repetitive. While it does add some unique elements to it, after a while it does get old, because that's the only way you can take out certain key enemies. I personally would have loved a little bit more experimentation when it comes to the enemies, forcing you to use different guns and less of the hacking sometimes to take certain ones out. While they do provide different ways to prevent you from hacking with flight blockers, jammers, and some other stuff, I do feel that it doesn't really work, and it still feels like there is too much of a reliance on the hacking at points. And also, the limited overall enemy variety is another problem that I do have with this game, where some of the robots, like Walker, are very easy and interesting when it comes to their attack patterns, having one key swipe and a couple other things. I do think some of the other ones do try to push the envelope, but it doesn't have enough enemy variety, in my own personal opinion, that really pushes it and actually makes you think, because you're still overly reliant on the hacking system to take out key enemies. Because when I was playing the game, finding out that the AI that you're fighting towards the first half of the game was the one that was actually making the robots, I thought that the AI would actually make robots that would actually go against certain key weapons and strategies that you could use to make the game a little bit harder, where you're less reliant on hacking and you're also less reliant on key overpowered gun layouts, where it actually makes robots with key strategies and defenses that not only block your ability to hack them, but also limit your access to defeat them with certain key guns, where you're actually forced to improvise and use different other combinations of guns to get around those key defenses. And I think that would have been interesting and brilliant, but it doesn't actually look like that was a key part of the game, and it really wasn't there, and I kind of feel a little disappointed by that fact, because I think that would have been brilliant. While the hacking system can be a little bit repetitive, it's still an overall great mechanic, and it does incorporate Diana's gameplay into your overall gameplay style of shooting, similar to what Capcom has done before with other key side characters, like they did in Resident Evil with Shiva, and also other characters like Ashley Graham. While I have talked about some of the collectibles, the environment, and the gunplay and hacking, I will say that there are some other elements to gameplay that I do like the overall training system, and also certain aspects of the upgrade and file system when it comes to your enemies. I do think some of the inclusions do pull from Resident Evil a lot, especially when it comes to the 3D models and descriptions of key enemies. I thought this was very interesting and cool to include, along with the cabin, which is actually kind of like your bingo card. If you get enough coins, you can get not only new stuff, but also cosmetic things and other stuff, like red keys, which will unlock certain harder type of battle areas in the base that are pretty fun, where you can find key collectibles in there as well. And I thought those areas were very challenging and fun to actually do, where sometimes I died over and over again. While I will say there are some complaints when it comes to the difficulty, with the hard difficulty difficulty being locked off until you complete the linear first campaign. I personally don't mind this because sometimes even I die and have some challenges when playing on normal difficulty, at least for this game, and I felt sometimes where it was very difficult despite it not even being on hard. So to the people like Mayo complaining about this, while I do get it, I just personally don't feel that whole thing needs to be something that you need to worry about. Now, moving away from my gameplay criticisms and praises when it comes to this game, and more get into my overall thoughts on the story itself, because the story of this game is very interesting to me. Compared to the other stories we've seen from Capcom from their other titles, this one ends in a very interesting note, and there will be spoilers, and I will get into heavier spoilers in the ending of this game later on, but I wanted to get into more brief spoilers when it comes to certain things with my thoughts on the story, because the story kind of gave me a very interesting feeling that's very hard to describe, because obviously, while it does pull a little bit from like that God of War 2018 and Last of Us style where you're bonding with this child and so on, there's a lot more to this story compared to those comparisons when you're really listening to the dialogue, looking at the audio logs, and actually paying attention to the hidden meaning behind some of the themes of the story when you really look at certain characters that are really described and what you see of them, especially later on. And some of the game's themes I actually managed to resonate with in a very surprising way, especially with the themes of the real main villain of the game, which was the scientist. And if I'm being honest with you, while I did have some issues with how this whole thing was handled with the backstory and how it connects to everything else and some other things, I still resonated with this idea of the backstory. While it is a bit cliche, it honestly resonates because it's something that I've even done, where I'm so stuck in my own world and I'm trying to do this and that and the other. I neglected something or someone that I care about to the point where eventually I didn't spend enough time with them and they were gone. In this case, it's someone that's trying to save the person they love to the point where eventually they still lose them instead of spending time with them the way they should have, and then eventually regretting it because you were so dissolved in your own world trying to save the person you love that you still eventually lose them anyways, and you should have cherished the time you had left with them. And that's something that really resonated with me, to the point where I had to just set the controller down and think and even cry for a moment, because I know this theme was a bit cliche, but it honestly is something that you can resonate with, because what would you not do for the person you love? And we've seen this type of theme be used before, even in a game like Marvel Spider-Man 2 with Norman and Harry Osborn, and I feel like that game could have pushed this theme even better, but I personally think this one really resonates in this game with how it is handled, with the Doctor even using the robots as a surrogate replacement for his daughter in a small therapeutic sense, where he's even reading to them and trying to pretend like they're his daughter because he's trying to save the person he has left and he still fails. And in some ways that also mirrors what is going on with Diana and Hugh in this story, where you're kind of doing something very similar with Diana, but it's in a better and more positive sense, where it actually encourages the idea of Diana being her own person, her own entity as well, with the idea of independence, compared to the idea of 8, who in a lot of ways was the Doctor's last-ditch effort to save his daughter, but also was left with the final imprint of him with bitterness, anger, depression, and his longing for revenge because of his regrets and him not being able to do what he wanted to do. And that alone actually shapes 8's actions, but the problem is that I feel like with us getting all of this backstory at the tail end of the game, instead of properly pacing it throughout just a little bit to very much hint at 8 actually being the main villain, I feel like kind of undercuts things. While we do understand her as an antagonist and we do kind of see her as a mirror to Diana and Hugh with the Doctor and stuff like that, and her actually having the opposite type of power set to Diana, I feel like that's just, it feels very underdeveloped, where it could have had a little bit more proper pacing, and actually, when she is revealed to be the villain, it is not out of nowhere. Because we literally just saved her and we have this impression, she's good, just to find out, in a couple scenes later, she's the bad guy. It's like, this is a little bit of a switch up, and I personally wish there was a little bit more time spent spent developing this. Which is a big reason why I do dislike certain elements of the story, because I wish there was some proper pacing, and I wish it wasn't as linear. If it's going to stick to a linear format, give it more levels. Like, do something similar to Resident Evil. Just a couple more stages would have been nice, just to fill in some more gaps. To expand the story just a little bit, like if it's going to stick to a linear couple level format, that's fine, but do a little bit like Resident Evil. Have maybe a couple more levels than what we originally had. This way it could fix some pacing issues, and it also could make the sudden switch up of 8 a little bit better, instead of it just being, oh, she's a bad guy now. Like, okay. This isn't just a pacing problem that connects to the main villains of the game, it also connects to the idea of other characters, like for instance, Hugh's crew. They literally are introduced just to die. I thought Isha had it bad in Arcane Season 2, but these guys don't even last a minute. And we're supposed to care when they do die? We only hear one of them die. The other two, it's left ambiguous to some extent. And honestly, I personally wish they would have done more with this idea of Hugh's crew, to where you do care about them a little bit more. Like, what if one of them was still alive and we actually witnessed them die in front of us? Like, we find them just for them to die. And I feel like that would have been a very interesting thing, because when Hugh actually talks about his crew to Diana and stuff, like, we're supposed to care, but personally, I didn't, because I didn't spend enough time with them to care. At least with Tess in The Last of Us, we spend a couple levels with her before she does die, and I feel like that would have been a very interesting thing, where at least maybe we could have spent a little bit more time with them, and then eventually they still die. Like, something like that would have been a bit more interesting, to where we care a little bit more. While I do understand that this game is supposed to center around Hugh and Diana and their story, I do understand that, but it would have been a bit more interesting. Plus, I also think some things when it comes to the story, I feel like there could have been a little bit more. The AI that is building the robots that are trying to kill you is the primary kind of antagonist for the first bits of the game, and he's kind of bland. Like, he doesn't adapt when it comes to your strategies, your gameplay, the hacking. He does a little, but he doesn't do it enough to where it matters. And unlike GLaDOS from Portal, there is no personality here. And for me, it doesn't make the AI very threatening. He just is very bland and boring. And the same can be said for 8 just a little bit. Like, she just doesn't have enough screen time to where we feel anything. At least I didn't feel anything when taking her down or fighting her or stuff like that. I think the real crux of the story is the ending, where Hugh dies. Like, it ends on a sad note, with Hugh dying supposedly and Diana being sent to Earth. And it does set up an idea of a sequel, and it also sets up this corporate thing like the Umbrella Corporation, which is what the Doctor was working for. And I think that whole idea is great, but if Hugh is dead, I believe that it's going to be missing a lot, especially if Diana's just going to look the same and she can't really grow or age. I think the setup for a sequel would just end up having it be a little bit bland and a little bit generic and cliche. And while I do think this game is great for what it is, there are a lot of flaws when it comes to the gameplay and the story, with the overall pacing and stuff like that. And the crux of this game's story is Hugh and Diana. If Hugh is dead, then there really isn't a lot that they can do. Yeah, they can give us another character, but I don't feel like it would be the same. And to be honest with you, I feel like Hugh was a great character. He had some personality, but he also felt a bit cliche. Like, of course he's an orphan, of course he's adopted, of course, like, just some of these things when it comes to him, I felt like, oh, of course, okay, yeah. But I still very much enjoyed some of the themes of this game, despite having some issues when it comes to the story and some of the inconsistencies when it comes to the pacing, like the idea of the reliance on technology, the idea of grieving, and honestly, themes of found family, independence, and a plethora of other things are really amazing, and they're handled very well when there are some things that back them up, but I do think they're undercut by the pacing and some issues with the story being a bit inconsistent in a couple areas. And the very cliche, I'm gonna destroy the world with dark matter or some type of crap type of plot at the tail end, it just, okay. That's just another issue I had. Despite my criticisms with some aspects of the story, I do think it does work well because it is linear and it does kind of borrow some aspects from Resident Evil and Devil May Cry, where you have these key levels and you're having to go to these key places at key moments, and that would progress the story forward. I really like that. This was a key part of the level design in the Devil May Cry games, and it's still still in modern video games, but it's just handled differently in key ones, where it's very old school, where if you go to level 1 and then to level 2 and level 3, but you stop at level 3 to go back to level 2 instead of going to level 4, you only get the new parts of the story when you go to the newer levels. You can still go back to older levels and look around without moving the story forward. And I really like that because it keeps it a bit consistent and you can actually have a bit of fun. Because sometimes you can get brand new dialogue between Hugh and Diana, and also you can actually backtrack and find key items and stuff. This type of level design actually gives you room to breathe and explore and find key things when you need to, while still also progressing the story forward as well if you want to. And I really like that type of approach. It gives the player a lot more control over your progression in the story, and I really like that because despite the pacing problems, I did really enjoy just having those kind of calm moments and fun moments spending time with Diana, and I honestly really enjoyed how that was handled in the game. So when it comes to my final thoughts, despite my issues with the story and despite my issues with some aspects of the gameplay, I still really had a fun time with this game. It was a good but yet flawed experience. The overall world and level design with the characters to boot were absolutely great. It felt very unique and honestly Capcom when it comes down to it, where it doesn't lean too much into what it's being compared to. While it still leans into those things sometimes, it honestly still feels like its own thing. And despite it having some issues when it comes down to the gameplay with its over-reliance on the hacking system, and sometimes it having some issues when it comes to the pacing of the story, it still felt very fun and really heartwarming and unique to play. Because this is the first time in a while that I've actually been stunned by something Capcom has made that has been an original franchise, not something that has been something they've made before. Personally, I feel like this could be a very interesting thing if they were to do more with it and fix some of the problems that the first game had in a sequel, still keeping the core elements that made it great, while also fixing some of the problems and inconsistencies, maybe making the game a little bit longer, and also trying to tweak certain aspects of the gameplay when it comes to the hacking system, because I personally feel like that was the core thing outside of the story problems that really dialed down my experience, because it does get a bit over-reliant on it. Plus, Diana and Hugh are absolutely great, and they can actually stand the test of time, being some top contenders for Capcom's greatest protagonists, next to Leon Kennedy, Jill Valentine, Dante, or even a couple other ones. So overall, if you are hesitating on this game like I was, I would recommend trying it out. If you don't like it, that's perfectly fine, but I think you're going to enjoy it as a Capcom game. There's a lot of familiarity when it comes to certain things in this game, and there's a lot of differences when it comes to things about this game. But I actually really enjoyed it, and I think you guys will too, but that's overall my opinion and review when it comes to Pragmata. But let me know your thoughts and opinions down below, and make sure to like this video if you did enjoy, or change it to a dislike if you didn't. That's perfectly fine. Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and also make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notifications button to be notified whether I upload. I'm hoping to fix some consistencies when it comes to my schedule of uploading sometime soon with more long-form content like this at some point. But yeah, check out some of the other videos on screen, and have a good rest of your guys' and gals' night, morning, afternoon, or whatever it is for you in the world. Peace out. Bye-bye.